I was rinsing paint rollers in the tiny laundry sink of my Chicago row house when the envelope arrived. My place is a slim brick home on West Huron Street, 2 bedrooms stacked over a creaky kitchen, with windows that rattle every time the L groans by. I bought it for $412,000, an outrageous price for something so small, but it was mine. After years of renting rooms and working temp jobs, this narrow house felt like a victory. The walls still smelled faintly of primer, and my lemon tree on the deck refused to bloom, but I loved its stubbornness. It reminded me of myself. The envelope sat on the doormat like a ghost from a past I'd buried. Cream paper, gold trim, expensive stock, the kind only my mother would use. My stomach tightened as I stared at the handwriting that curved with practiced confidence. Patricia's handwriting. My mother's. I hadn't seen it in 12 years. Not since the night she erased me from our family like a line written in sand. Back then, I stood at our mahogany dining table in Seattle while she laid out a lab report that claimed I wasn't biologically connected to my father. I was 26, working for the family's chain of private clinics, and about to be named a partner. Overnight, I became a stranger. The next morning, my key card stopped working, my email was deleted, and my inheritance, my father's legacy, was redirected entirely to my sister, Kala. The letterhead looked official. I didn't know until years later that the document was forged. I picked up the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. The seal broke cleanly when I ran a butter knife under it. Inside was a wedding invitation. Kala and Desmond Hale. The sight of those names hit me like a slap. Desmond was a name I hadn't said aloud in years. Once, he'd been a guest lecturer in a glass-walled boardroom where I worked as a junior analyst. I'd offered a model that saved his firm nearly $750,000 in projected losses. He called it adorable, laughed, and asked me to bring more coffee. Everyone joined in his laughter. I left that job within the week and moved to Chicago to start again, determined never to give anyone the satisfaction of watching me break. I turned the invitation over. A note was written on the back in the same calligraphy. Time softens everything. I dropped it into the sink. The gold ink bled slowly under the water, spreading like an infection. Time hadn't softened anything. It had only crystallized every scar. That night, I cleared my small dining table and began laying out everything I had kept over the years. Evidence. Fragments. The photo of the DNA test my mother claimed proved I wasn't my father's daughter. A printed article about Kala's award-winning research in Boston. My research, repackaged and renamed. A pitch deck Desmond had presented years after our encounter that mirrored a white paper I'd written and sent him privately. And finally, the financial reports from my family's clinics, numbers that didn't add up. Supply costs dropped while patient visits increased. I'd seen the pattern before, but didn't have proof. I realized something then. The life they built had cracks, and through those cracks, the truth might still be breathing. I opened my laptop and booked a round-trip ticket to Seattle for $498. I also reserved 2 rooms at the Belmont Region Hotel, one in my name, one for a man named Leo Marsh, a forensic accountant from New York, who owed me a favor. Leo had a talent for turning financial shadows into trails. If I were going to reopen old wounds, I wanted someone who knew how to document the bleeding. When I finished packing, I walked through my little house, brushing my hand against the white walls I had painted myself. Each room carried the quiet pride of survival. I had paid for the roof repair with my own card, replaced the furnace for $1,900 cash, and spent winters wrapped in thrift store quilts, waiting for the sound of my own strength to feel real. This house was no mansion, but it didn't owe me anything. I stood at the window, looking out at the amber streetlight reflecting off the wet pavement. Somewhere across the country, the woman who raised me was planning a wedding that excluded me once again. My mother, Patricia, the woman who taught me manners, then used them to silence me. My sister, Kala, the golden child who learned how to steal without touching anything. And Desmond, the man who humiliated me in front of a room full of suits. I wasn't going to the wedding for closure. I didn't believe in that word anymore. I was going because something in me had stopped accepting their version of the truth. I needed to see the empire they had built from my absence and decide whether silence was still protection or just complicity. Before bed, I set the envelope on the windowsill. The city lights turned their gold border dull and gray. I whispered to the quiet room, "You wanted me gone. You'll see what that costs." Then I turned off the lamp and let the train's distant hum lull me to sleep, knowing that the next time I opened my eyes, the past would no longer be behind me. It would be waiting. Leo met me in the lobby of the Belmont Regent with a travel mug and a half-smile that never touched his eyes. He looked the same as when I'd last seen him in New York, pressed gray suit, a quiet air of calculation, and that steady stillness of someone who's seen too many numbers tell too many lies. "You really want to do this?" he asked as we stepped into the elevator. "I need to," I said. "I'm done wondering." His room looked like a war zone of technology, printer, scanner, and enough cables to power a newsroom. I handed him the files I'd collected over the years. The photo of the DNA report, the old financial spreadsheets from my family's clinics, and the cached pages of Kala's prize-winning research. For years, these files had been my private ghosts. Now they were about to be evidence. Leo opened the first file, the blurry image of the test that had exiled me. "Let's start here," he said, zooming in. His trained eye caught details mine never had. "See that corner?" he said, pointing to a faint misalignment in the lab's logo. "That's not how official documents print. Looks like it was pulled from a press packet, not their current template." He ran a comparison with the lab's legitimate filings online. The font weights were off. The watermark was missing. The letterhead spacing didn't match. "Someone tried hard to make this look real," he said quietly. "But they didn't think anyone would look this close." I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening. "She made me believe I didn't belong," I said. "All this time, and it was just copied?" Leo nodded. "Not just copied. Manufactured." We moved on to the clinic records. I'd pulled these from old reports I used to help reconcile before I was locked out. The numbers looked tidy at first glance, patient volumes, expenses, quarterly gains, but Leo's eyes lit up when he noticed the dips. "Here," he said, circling a stretch on the screen. "Supplies dropped for 3 months every summer, but patient visits rose. That's not a cycle issue. It's hiding something." He cross-checked the clinic's public data with a state malpractice registry. The screen filled with sealed cases labeled only as community relief. The settlement amounts matched the cost dips almost perfectly. Patricia had built her empire on cover-ups. I felt sick. My father, Henry, had started those clinics from a single rented office near Green Lake. He used to tell me, "Medicine is a promise, not a profit." After his death, Patricia expanded everything: new buildings, new investors, new control. Somewhere along the way, the promise died too. Leo's tone softened. "You were right to dig. This isn't small. It's a pattern." The next folder was titled Boston. That one hurt most. Kala's face smiled from an article announcing her prestigious £25,000 prize for innovation in women's cardiac care. The research plan they praised her for? Word for word, it was mine. I'd written it 2 years earlier after our aunt survived a heart attack that every doctor dismissed as anxiety. Leo scrolled through my old drafts. "Look here," he said. "Same phrasing, same structure, and this typo." He pointed to where I'd written cardiac instead of cardiology. Kala's copy had the same mistake. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the scanner. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. "She didn't even bother to fix it," I whispered. Leo leaned back in his chair. "This part we can prove, cleanly. Timestamped emails, metadata. You wrote it first. She used it. End of story." "Not end," I said. "Just beginning." I went out for air. Across the street, a bakery's windows glowed warm against the gray Seattle drizzle. I bought 2 coffees and a pack of butter cookies, trying to steady my hands. Outside, the city looked almost like the one I left behind. Steel towers, blue-gray water, and the scent of rain. But beneath it all, something colder pulsed. It wasn't nostalgia. It was unfinished business. I thought about the cedar house north of the city, our old family home. The porch where Kala and I played tag, the swing my father built that creaked like laughter. The last time I saw it, Patricia stood on the steps, arms crossed, and told me, "Take the check and go. This is cleaner." $4,000 for my place in the family. I took it, not because I wanted to, but because I was too broken to fight. That money became the seed for my new life in Chicago. Back at the hotel, Leo and I began to build a timeline. Every forged report, every suspicious payment, every stolen line of research, it all led back to one core truth. My mother's empire wasn't made of family legacy. It was made of lies. When we finished pinning everything to the board, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like a bone polished by time. Leo looked at me quietly. "You don't have to confront them," he said. "You could walk away and still win." I shook my head. I've been walking away for 12 years. It's time they see me standing. That evening, I wandered into the ballroom where the staff were rehearsing for the wedding. Chandeliers gleamed above rows of gold chairs, and the air smelled of roses and champagne. My sister's name, Kala, was spelled out in tall brass letters near the stage. I traced a fingertip along one of them, feeling its cool metal surface. When I closed my eyes, I saw Desmond again, his mocking smile, his laughter echoing in that boardroom years ago. This time, though, I didn't shrink. I stood taller, shoulders squared. I took a photo of those brass letters and sent it to Leo with a single word, "Tomorrow." He replied with a simple checkmark. I didn't pray that night. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I only practiced 3 sentences, clean, steady, and sharp enough to cut through 12 years of silence. I wanted the truth to stand on its own feet. And when it did, I knew none of them would be able to look away. The ballroom gleamed with light and perfume, every inch of it designed to dazzle. The wedding gala wasn't just a celebration, it was a coronation. I lingered at the entrance, my heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet, watching the crowd swirl in gold and champagne. Part of me wanted to turn around, to vanish into the night, and let them keep their illusions. But I'd spent 12 years in silence, and tonight was the end of that. I stepped forward. A string quartet played something delicate, the kind of music that makes people feel elegant without realizing they're being distracted. Waiters glided past with trays of caviar and flutes of vintage champagne. I found my place by the second marble pillar, 3 feet of quiet space carved out in a room that had never wanted me in it. That was enough. Patricia entered first, in a silver gown that caught the light like armor. Even now, she carried herself like a woman who had never been wrong. My father's portrait rested on an easel near the bar, a framed tribute to legacy and perfection. Henry's eyes seemed to follow me through the crowd. For a moment it steadied me. Then Kala appeared. She was glowing. Every inch of her was crafted perfection. The diamond-studded neckline, the ivory silk that hugged her waist, the glint of satisfaction in her smile. Desmond stood beside her, sleek as ever in his tailored tux, his hand resting on her back in ownership disguised as affection. I should have felt hate. Instead, I felt nothing but clarity. The host took the microphone and introduced them as visionaries. The crowd applauded as though they were witnessing royalty. I waited until the band paused and the applause began to fade. That's when Leo appeared at my side, his expression calm, but his eyes alive with purpose. He gave a slight nod, the signal we had agreed on. The projector flickered to life at the back of the room. "Before we begin tonight's program," I said, taking the microphone, "I wanted to share a small tribute to family and to truth." The lights dimmed. The first slide appeared, 2 documents side by side. On the left, the DNA test that had erased me from my inheritance. On the right, the real letterhead from the same lab, retrieved through public records. The fonts were wrong. The watermark is missing. The forged logo is tilted by a single pixel. A soft murmur rippled through the guests. "Some of you may remember a time when certain truths were rewritten," I said. This was one of them. The next slide appeared. My original research proposal, displayed beside Kala's prize-winning version. The same format, the same wording, even the same typo, cardiac instead of cardiology. A timestamp appeared in the corner, proving my draft came a year earlier. Then, projected in large script, came an email reply from Patricia herself. Let her sister have a turn. Don't be jealous. The murmur grew louder. Someone gasped. I saw Kala's hand tremble slightly where she gripped her champagne glass. And finally, I said, the clinics. The last slide filled the screen, columns of numbers, carefully arranged. The dips in supply purchases. The sealed settlements marked community relief. Leo had labeled them clearly, malpractice payments disguised as expenses. I took a breath. These numbers tell their own story. Out of respect for the patients involved, I won't share names. But out of respect for the truth, I won't keep silent. The ballroom fell into a heavy stillness. I could hear the hum of the ice machine behind the bar. Then, Patricia's voice sliced through the silence. This is a wedding, she said coldly. You have no right. I met her gaze, steady. I have every right. The right to exist. The right to speak. The right to reclaim the truth that was taken from me. Desmond's laugh came next, forced and brittle. You came all this way to ruin your sister's happiness? I turned toward him.
No.
I came to return what doesn't belong to you. I held up a thin folder, its edges sharp and clean. Inside are signed statements from former clinic employees and one lab technician, each of them confirming payments sent through your firm, Desmond. Payments traced to a shell company under my mother's name. Gasps erupted across the room. Someone dropped a glass. A journalist near the back raised a phone and started recording. Patricia's lips barely moved. You'll regret this. I already did, I said quietly. For 12 years. Kala's expression cracked. You don't understand, she whispered. You're destroying everything. I'm not destroying it, I said. I'm just turning on the lights. I placed the folder on a table near the stage. Anyone who wants to see, take a photo. Ask questions. Verify it yourselves. Then I looked at the crowd one last time. I'm not here for applause or pity. I'm here for air. And with that, I walked away. The ballroom remained silent behind me. No one tried to stop me. The sound of my heels echoed against the marble until I stepped outside into the cool Seattle night. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, soft and silver. 2 blocks away, Leo caught up. He didn't speak. He just hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The Cedar House, I said before I could stop myself. When we reached the hill, I told the driver to pull over. The porch light of our old home glowed faintly in the mist. Someone had repainted the railings. I stared at the house that had once been everything, safety, love, belonging, and realized it was none of those things anymore. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from an unknown number, state investigator requesting a statement. Another from a reporter. And one from Kala. Why would you do this to me? I turned off the phone and looked out at the quiet street. The wind moved through the fir trees, whispering like an old memory. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Morning crept in through the half-drawn curtains, soft and pale against the chaos of the night before. The Belmont Regent was eerily quiet, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath after the storm. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't need to read to know what they said. Somewhere down the hall, a housekeeping cart rattled, breaking the silence just enough to make the world feel real again. I brewed coffee in the small silver pot by the window and carried it onto the narrow balcony. From there, the view framed a sliver of Elliott Bay, gray and calm under the morning mist. I waited for the guilt to come, the crash of doubt that usually follows a confrontation, but it didn't. What came instead was a calm so sharp it almost frightened me. It was the kind of silence that follows a broken spell. A soft knock at the door pulled me back. Leo stepped in, holding a folder and looking more awake than he had any right to be. You made headlines, he said, setting his coffee down. The lab's already confirmed an internal audit. The state board opened an inquiry into the clinics. And Desmond's firm scrubbed its site, though the archived pages are already circulating. I smiled faintly. The internet never forgets. He leaned against the wall. So, what now? I go home, I said. Not to them. To me. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You did what you came to do. When I checked out, the clerk avoided eye contact. The receipt was printed without a word. I left a $60 tip for the housekeeper and handed Leo the extra room key as we'd planned. As I stepped outside, the Seattle air felt softer, cleaner somehow. Maybe it wasn't the city that had changed. Maybe it was me. At the airport, I bought a paperback and a sandwich that tasted like salt and exhaustion. During the flight, I opened my notebook and wrote a letter I'd been avoiding for years. It was for Patricia. I didn't dress it in anger. I kept it plain honest. I told her I wasn't going to pursue the money, even though I had every legal right. I wrote that the files were with the right authorities and that I hoped, for the sake of the patients, she'd cooperate. My father's clinics had started as a promise, to care, to heal. I asked her, just once, to keep that promise. At the bottom, I wrote one last line. I forgive you in the way one forgives a storm. It isn't personal. It's the weather. I wasn't sure I believed it, but the moment my pen lifted, my hands stopped shaking. When I landed in Chicago, the November air greeted me with its familiar bite. My small row house looked just as I'd left it, modest, quiet, sturdy. The lemon tree on the deck had dropped a few leaves, but it was still alive. I dragged my suitcase up the steps, turned the key, and stepped inside. The late sunlight spilled across the floor, turning the matte white paint to gold. I placed my phone on the table, but didn't turn it on. Instead, I boiled water, made tea, and opened the back door to let the sound of the L drift through the air. That old rumble, steady, unapologetic, felt like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. 2 days later, I walked to a neighborhood law office, a brick building squeezed between a cafe and a flower shop. I paid $250 for a 1-hour consult and asked the lawyer to help me write a public statement, just in case reporters came calling. She read my draft carefully, then looked up with a soft smile. "This is perfect," she said. The statement was simple. I'm grateful to live in a country where records can be corrected. I'm not seeking money or attention. I only want the truth to stand, and then I want to go back to my life. "You're not angry," the lawyer said. "I've been angry long enough," I replied. On Friday, I took the train to a small real estate office on Division Street and signed a modest refinance to repair my roof properly, $18,500. I could afford it now. Afterward, I walked to a nearby coffee shop and made a small online donation, $1,000, to a women's cardiac foundation in Boston. I wrote it in memory of my aunt and in quiet recognition of the research that was once mine. I didn't need to reclaim the prize. I wanted the work to keep living where it could do good. When I finally turned my phone on, hundreds of messages flooded the screen. Strangers wrote to say they'd watched the video of the gala, that they saw themselves in my story. I didn't answer most of them, but I read every line. Then, at the bottom of the list, there was one message from Kala. I didn't know how to stop what began, she wrote. I stared at it for a long time, then replied, "You can stop now. Start by telling the truth. No anger. No edge. Just finality." That night, I stood in my small kitchen, the window cracked open to the city's hum. The scent of rain drifted in, mixing with the faint lemon of my tea. I leaned against the counter, letting the quiet fill every corner. The empire built on my silence had fallen, not because I destroyed it, but because truth doesn't need fire. It only needs air. I didn't need to fix their legacy or rewrite their story. I only had to write my own. Before bed, I ran my fingers along the old banister, rough with years of use. Tomorrow, I'd sand it smooth. It wouldn't look perfect. It would look honest. And that was enough. I turned off the lights, slid under the cotton sheets, and listened to the steady rhythm of the L in the distance. For the first time in 12 years, my mind didn't race. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. Freedom, I realized, costs less than revenge, and it buys far more.